You've got the perfect man bun. You wear the latest Patagonia gear. You drive a brand new Subaru Outback to your job as a brand manager for an organic pet food company, where you back into your favorite parking spot every single day. Naturally, you appreciate the predictable, consistent nature of a striker-fired action. But Glocks are so passé. That's why CZ makes a mid-size polymer-framed striker-fired carry gun for a gun hipster like you, the P-10C. On the other hand, maybe you're rocking a faux hawk. Maybe you've got some David Lee Roth hair metal vibes going on. You wear distressed leather over buffalo plaid. You drive your oil-burning MK6 GTI to your part-time gig as a graphic designer for an intimate apparel company. And when you're not bonging IPA and smoking cloves, you enjoy the clean feel of a real single-action trigger, even if you've got to slog through a double-action pole to get there. That's why CZ makes a mid-size, polymer-framed, hammer-fired carry gun for a gun hipster like you, the P-07, which is now going to be called the P-09 Nocturne, which is a dope-ass name. So, my striker hipsters, my hammer hipsters, we're going to talk about both these guns today. What makes them different, what makes them awesome, and why CZ has your back, no matter what kind of a gun hipster you are.
It was a smoking gun. 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 It was a
Alright guys, it is the war of the mid-size polymer-framed, reasonably priced carry guns from CZ. And I think this is an interesting comparison because I'm not sure how many people are actually cross-shopping these two guns, because I think we kind of identify as either striker-fire people or DASA hammer-fire people, and we go to the guns that offer that, and we might not consider other offerings in the other action. And obviously the intro is kind of a joke. CZ is known as kind of a hipster brand. I think that's because the brand is just a little off the beaten path compared to some brands that are a little more known to people who might not be as into guns, and you have this perception that people who are just really into guns are into CZ, and that makes them a hipster. I don't know. I feel like being a gun hipster doesn't have anything to do with brand. You're kind of brand agnostic and you just like what you like. But the one thing I can say without any doubts is that all the CZs I've owned 4 CZs, and they're all just really good shooters. They're naturally good shooting guns, and these two are no exception. Admittedly, I'm more of a hammer-fired, double-action, single-action kind of guy. I have a lot of SIGs, a lot of Berettas, and that's just my comfort zone. I like the DASA system for carry, but, you know, I like striker-fired guns too. I came into owning both these. This was just a smashing deal that I couldn't pass up, and then I saw another really good deal on this, so I got both of them, and I thought it would be interesting to compare them. And I think the long story short is these guns both do the same thing. They both have the same destination, so to speak, in the fact that they're in the same size ballpark. They're affordable generally. They're not cheap, but they're affordable, and they both shoot very well. But they both take very different routes to achieving that. They're very different guns. Lest you think, you know, the P10C is kind of a striker-fired version of the P-07. That's not the case. They're very different. They have almost nothing in common mechanically. But at the end of the day, they're both accurate, they're both reliable, and they will serve you well as just kind of a mid-size do-all carry gun. With that overview in mind, let's get into a little bit of the background and design of these guns. And these aren't guns with like a rich history, so I'm not going to go too much into that. But the P-07 came out first, and it was originally released in 2009 as the P-07 Duty. It was designed to be kind of a polymer-framed, more affordable version of their original CZ75 architecture. It uses basically the layout of the CZ75. It retains the inverted slide rails that the CZ75 is known for, and the cam path is a little different. The CZ75 uses the enclosed slot for a cam path that was actually pioneered on the SIG P210. This uses more of an open slot, more like what you'd find on a SIG or a Browning High Power. And the P-07 uses what's called the Omega trigger, and that is just kind of a simplified trigger action. We'll talk about how that impacts the trigger pull and everything like that. And so, after the P-07 Duty was introduced, there was a refresh in 2014, I think. And they dropped the name Duty, they made the polymer a little better, they added some cosmetic changes like front slide serrations. So this represents, I guess you could call it a second generation P-07, and like I said, going forward this gun is going to be renamed the P-09C Nocturne. And the P-09 has been the full-size version of this gun, and they're dropping the P-07 name, and it's the P-09 and the P-09C. And with that, the P-09C is going to come optics ready, and it has some different ergonomic changes and some different cosmetic changes. So the P-10C was released in 2017 to much fanfare in the gun world. CZ didn't really have a polymer or a striker-fired offering at that point, and they wanted something to compete with the Glock 19, and they really designed this to go right at the Glock 19, and this gun was just super hyped, back then when it came out as kind of the Glock 19 killer. In terms of its design, it's, like I said, it really represents a completely new platform. It doesn't carry anything over that I can see mechanically from the original CZ75 design, and it's, like I said, it really has nothing in common with the P-07. And that's not 100% true. Both guns do use the same magazines, so you can switch magazines between them, and they use the same recoil spring assembly. It's a captured flat wire recoil spring. So they do share those components, but if you look at like the cam path and the barrel design and the way the frame rails are set up, that's all completely different, and it's the P10C does not really inherit anything in that regard from the P-07. As far as its size and footprint, it's very similar to a Glock 19. It's actually just slightly longer, and the grip is just slightly higher, but certainly it does compete with that kind of mid-size striker-fired do-all, carryable gun. It has a partially cocked striker-fired trigger system with a dingus, so just like a Glock. As much as it was hyped in the first year or two that it was around, the enthusiasm for it kind of started to die down, I think, and people just kind of forgot about it after a while. And the prices started to fall, and I think CZ's offering these MSRP for like under $400 now. I found this one for about $300, and it was used at my local gun shop, and it was just like, okay, I'll try it. And, I was pleasantly surprised. Like I said, I am more of a hammer-fired, double-action, single-action kind of guy, but I was really impressed by how this gun shot. And, I didn't get on the bandwagon back in the day when the P10C was initially introduced, so I didn't really have any expectations, but I'm going to say it kind of lives up to the hype. It's a really good shooting gun, but so is the P-07. So if I had to describe the shooting characteristics of both these guns in kind of a nutshell, I would say the P-07 is mild and stable, whereas the P-10C is more engaging and more communicative. And like, there's no wrong answer. They both shoot well, but they're different in terms of how they feel subjectively. The P-07 is actually a little bit heavier. It's about 2 ounces heavier. And the slide, while shorter, as you can see, is actually heavier than, it's about 0.2 of an ounce heavier than the slide on the P-10C. So that's interesting. Also interesting is that the barrel on the P-10C is heavier than the barrel on the P-07. And if you look at the back end of the barrel, around the barrel hood where it locks into the ejection port on the P-10C, it's really beefy. There's less machined away on the sides of the lug and the feed ramp, so you have more weight back here in the barrel on the P-10C, so the weight kind of centers right over the trigger guard. So it has a nice balanced feel, where, you know, the P-07 feels a little more front heavy. The action on the P-10C overall just feels a little smoother, and you know, you have the the longer rails, the inverted internal rails on the P-07 like you do on most CZs. So I feel like there's a little bit more friction going on as the slide's cycling, whereas you have the little metal tabs on this, so there's less, you know, metal to metal contact with this. But even when the barrel cams itself, it feels a little smoother when you know, the cam engages and drops the barrel down on the P-10C, and then, you know, the slide finishes its cycle. It just feels like it's on glass. And what I end up feeling is there's a little bit more of a bounce to the recoil impulse with the P-10C. It's a good bounce. It's a bounce that's communicative and engaging, and it just helps you get into a really good rhythm with the P-10C. And the bore axis is a little lower on the P-10C, so you know, that means more of the recoil comes back into you, and I feel like, you know, the P-10C lets you use the recoil to kind of shoot more instinctively, more intuitively, whereas the P-07, it's, like I said, it's a little softer. The recoil just kind of disappears, and it's very mild-mannered, it's very stable, and it's a nice, pleasant gun to shoot, but it doesn't give you as much feedback and as much context shot to shot as what you get with the P-10C. And then, of course, you have a little bit higher bore axis, so there's a little more rise. It's not as high as what you find on a SIG. This is still a lower bore axis than what you find on a SIG, but you know, there's a little more muzzle rise than what you get on the P-10C. The P-10C's recoil straight back, so you feel more of it. And I don't want to suggest that the recoils punishing are bad or overwhelming on the P-10C. It's not the unpleasant characteristics of recoil. It's recoil in the sense of communication and feedback and context, shot to shot. Also, triggers. Triggers are very different in these, and typically I am a fan of hammer-fired triggers. You can usually, with a single action hammer-fired trigger, it allows you to achieve a degree of precision in terms of shot placement that you typically don't get with a striker-fired trigger. But here's the thing. The single action brake on the P-07 is strange. It's a rolling brake. I describe it as a rolling brake for sure, but there's so much creep and slip that there's really not as much of a defined wall as you typically get on a single action trigger brake. And that's kind of why you like a hammer fired gun, because you get a defined wall that you can index against and shoot more precisely. But this doesn't really offer that as much as some other hammer-fired guns. Between the two of these guns, I did some of my most precise shooting with the P-07. Once I was able to figure out where the brake was, kind of in that creep that is in the trigger. But at the same time, it was just, I feel like it was less forgiving. I always had more flyers with this gun. It was hard to find that brake, and it was harder to get in the rhythm. Whereas I think the trigger on the P10C is, it has the characteristics of kind of a partially cocked striker-fired trigger. It does feel like that, but, think of a Glock trigger, but it is better than a Glock trigger in every way. It's like all the things that suck about a Glock trigger or a Glock-like trigger have been tuned and edited out in such a way that it leaves you with a very shootable trigger. It's strange because usually it's the opposite, but the wall is more defined and easier to index against with this gun versus the P-07. And I think it's interesting if you look inside to the trigger linkages on these guns. On the P10C, you've got a dual-sided stirrup trigger bar, and like a 1911. And I think that is really important for getting kind of an even, consistent feel when you're pulling the trigger. When James Reeves interviewed one of the guys at CZ, one of the designers, the product lead on the P10C, he mentions that. He says, yeah, we have a dual-sided stirrup-style trigger bar, and that gives you a better feel, and it absolutely does. Any gun I've shot that has a dual-sided trigger bar generally has a really good feel to the trigger. And while CZ typically always had that in their CZ75 derivatives, the P-07 uses the Omega trigger, which is a simplified design, and that has a single-sided trigger bar, like you find on a SIG, like you find on a Beretta. This is fine, and it's not bad, but it's not... This gun has a better trigger. The P10C has a better trigger, and I'm surprised I'm saying that versus a hammer-fired gun. And then, obviously we've got the double action pull in on the P-07, and it's hitchy and stagey, and I will try to show that to you, but you can see it kind of stick and slip and stick, and it's just not great. That said, it doesn't really affect accuracy all that much. Like it's not necessarily pleasant to pull, but it's not terribly heavy, and I was able to keep my shots pretty tightly grouped when I was shooting, decocking between shots and shooting double action. Honestly, this gun is somewhat easier to shoot in double action than some other double action guns, which I would say have better double action triggers. So it's a very shootable gun in double action, and while the single action is not as good as some other single actions on double action, single action guns, it's still shootable, and I think with some practice you can get used to it and kind of dial in that vague break in single action, and you'll be able to shoot this very accurately. I shot better overall, I feel like, with the P10C. There's just more feel to this gun, there's more feedback, it's easier to get into the rhythm. The trigger break has more feel, the recoil impulse has more feel, and you're just more in tune with what's going on with this gun than you are with the P-07, especially when you're shooting fast. I mean, this gun's really fun to shoot fast because you've got that bouncy pulse in terms of the recoil impulse that really, keeps you engaged, keeps you in communication with what's going on with each shot. Even when I was mag dumping this thing pretty aggressively, like I was able to keep it like in the area of like a head on a silhouette target. And even when I'm shooting like reasonably fast, like they're all kind of going in the 10 ring. The ergonomics are better on the P10C. And I held a P-07 at a gun shop one time, and I was like, man, that feels really good. And then I bought this, and I was like, holy shit. I mean, the ergonomics on the P10C are just fantastic, and on the P-07 the sides are flat. The sides are just straight. There's no curvature, and I really like curvature generally on my guns. It makes a convex kind of curve here, gives you more to index against with your support hand, and it lends to better lateral stability. And that is certainly the case with this. In a way, the curvature and the ergonomics and the shape of this grip, it makes it easier to separate the motion of your trigger finger from the rest of your hand. I don't know how else to explain it, but it really engages your entire hand, and it's just kind of stable and supporting the gun, and then when you go to move your trigger finger, you're not moving the rest of your hand, and it's very natural. And then your support hand connects better because you've got this convex, side, and it's a great feeling gun ergonomically. And that's not to say that the P-07 doesn't feel good. It really does feel good. The distance, the trigger reach is really good on the P-07, and actually it's a little shorter on the P-07 versus the P-10C, especially if you go with the short back strap. So if you have really small hands, I have really small hands, you might want to go with the smaller back strap. I actually put the medium back strap on because I feel like, kind of forcing my hand into a slightly more pronounced curve here gives you better stability. So that feels right to me, and it positions my finger right on the trigger, I feel like. But again, I don't get the lateral support that I get on the P-07 that I get with the P-10C. Like I said, the recoil impulse is very mild on this. It's a good feeling gun. It's the bore axis feels just right. It's not too high, it's not too low, and it's just a very neutral, mild-mannered gun. And like I said, it can be very accurate. And of course, you can get Cajun Gunworks offers a lot of options for the P-07, P-09 platform. You can turn this gun into something that is a really good shooter, and I think you can clean up the trigger to a point that it kind of overcomes some of its, its shortcomings in terms of that vague single action break and the hitchiness and the double action. I think to get this gun to reach its full potential, you probably have to invest in some aftermarket stuff. So at the end of the day, I guess I would say the P-07 shoots kind of like a SIG. Here's my P-229. But it's a little more muted. It's a little more numb even than a SIG. I guess I would say on the other hand, the P-10C shoots kind of like a Glock, but everything that kind of is meh about shooting a Glock has been tuned to the point where it's really good. And usually, I tend to think just the run-of-the-mill striker-fired guns that they're just kind of off the shelf are kind of like appliances. They have no feel, no character, no personality, and nothing could be further from the truth with the P-10C. It is a very engaging gun to shoot. It is a shooter's gun, I think more so than the P-07. Out of the box, like I said, you can tune up the P-07 to where it's much better than it is from the factory, but this is an athletic feeling shooter's gun. So as far as reliability, I've got roughly 250 rounds through both of these, and I realize that's not a ton, but I've had zero issues with both of them. I haven't cleaned them between range trips. I made sure they were oiled and everything. I always do that with all my guns. They ran crummy remanufactured ammo. They ran crummy steel-cased ammo. And I had zero issues. And that's saying something, because the other two CZs I have owned, my CZ Rami and my PCR, neither of them would run remanufactured ammo reliably. They ran all factory ammo just fine, but they seemed a little more finicky to me than comparable SIGs and Berettas and Walthers and Smith & Wessons. That was one thing I wasn't crazy about. And it's do you expect a gun to run shitty ammo? And some people say no. It's why would you expect your gun to run ammo that's not right? But at the same time, it's just for me, I don't necessarily want my gun to be an ammo diva, and having some margin for error in terms of, if the crimp isn't exactly right, it's still going to cycle. And sometimes that's remanufactured ammo is all you can get. And I remember back in 2020, it's you were lucky to get anything, whether it was remanufactured or factory or whatever. And having a gun that can run that, I think, is good. And I think you are going to get a really reliable gun with either of these, and everything I read kind of corroborates that. These are seen as good, reliable guns. Now that said, CZs, people say they have quote-unquote tight chambers or short chambers. What they're referring to is there's less length in the chamber, and a round that has too much of an overall length can cause problems. And I don't know if it applies to these or not, but you know, that's just one thing to keep in mind. But like I said, these were insensitive to crummy ammo in terms of remanufactured or steel case ammo. So, in conclusion, if I had to pick one, and I am going to pick one because I just bought a Walther Q4 SF and I cannot afford to keep all these guns that I've currently got. And if I was really, you know, serious about making one of these two guns kind of a self-defense carry gun, I would probably go for the P-07 just because it is double action, single action, and I like that system. But, you know, I have so many other guns, other mid-sized double action, single action, 9mm that I tend to shoot a little better, and I just kind of like a little better than the P-07. This P-229, for instance, you know, with the G10 grips on it, which, you know, you can't get G10 grips on a polymer frame. I mean, this thing shoots so frickin' well, and the single action trigger is better, the double action trigger is smoother, and you get a little bit more feel, I think, with the SIG because it has the metal frame. And this gun is a great shooting gun. My Beretta PX4, you know I love the PX4 if you haven't watched my review on it. I definitely think that is a better shooter, you know, just naturally than the P-07. And I'd pick that any day of the week. And again, it's not to say this is a poor shooter. It's very accurate, and I was able to get good accuracy from it. But, you know, I wanted, it was kind of like the missing piece in my mid-size double action, single action 9mm experience, and I wanted to see if I was missing anything. And, you know, compared to guns like this and the PX4 and other Berettas and stuff, it's just, I don't feel like I'm missing anything with this. So I'm probably going to part with this. I plan to keep the P10C, and I want to do kind of a in-depth, get more rounds through it, get to know it more, and do kind of a full in-depth review on it at some point. I've got some other guns I want to do first, so this will be down the road, but I do really respect this gun, and I think it's an interesting gun, and I think it'll make for a more interesting review, just because of, you know, what CZ was able to accomplish with this gun. And it's clear what they had in mind to kind of go for the Glock 19 niche, but bring a level of shootability that didn't exist in that niche previously. And I think they did an amazing job with this gun. In any case, that is my take on the two mid-size, mid-priced polymer frame carry guns from CZ. And again, there's no wrong answer. Both these guns are really good, and if you are looking for a DASA carry gun that's kind of mid-sized, check out the P-07. If you want something that is, you know, on the level of a Glock 19 but shoots a lot better, check out the P-10C. In any case, thank you so much for watching. My name is Matt, and I will catch you later.